Have you ever found yourself lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying something you said or didn't say months, maybe even years ago? Maybe it was a job you didn't take, a love you let slip away, a cruel word you spoke in anger. Or maybe it's not just one moment, but a collection of them, quietly following you like shadows in the daylight. Regret has a peculiar way of sneaking into the quiet moments. It's not loud like fear or thrilling like desire. It whispers, often when we least expect it, reminding us of a version of ourselves we wish we could rewrite. And yet, despite its subtlety, regret can shape the architecture of our minds. It can inform how we see the world, how we treat others, and how we define ourselves. This video is not about avoiding mistakes, because to live is to err. It's about understanding what regret is, why it holds such power over us, and most importantly, how we can learn to coexist with it, and eventually let it go. Let's take a deep breath and begin. But before we can move forward, we need to understand, what is regret, really? And why is it such a defining part of the human experience? To understand regret, we first have to understand what it is and what it isn't. Regret is more than disappointment. It's not simply sadness or guilt. Regret is a unique emotion, defined by a recognition that a different action, a different choice, could have led to a better outcome. It is fundamentally tied to imagination, and more specifically to counterfactual thinking, our brain's remarkable ability to simulate alternative realities. To say to ourselves, if only I had studied harder, I could have passed. If only I had called her back, maybe we'd still be together. Regret, then, is born not just from what happened, but from what could have happened. It's the emotional residue of unrealized potential. Psychologists refer to this as upward counterfactual thinking, imagining a better outcome than the one we experienced. While downward counterfactuals, imagining how things could have been worse, can actually soothe us, upward counterfactuals tend to sting. This capacity for mental simulation is, ironically, one of the greatest hallmarks of human intelligence. It's part of what allows us to plan, to create, to evolve. But it also burdens us with the awareness of missed opportunities, a burden most animals never experience. As psychologist Daniel Gilbert once said, regret requires responsibility. A dog doesn't regret chewing up the couch because it can't mentally project into a different timeline where it didn't chew the couch. But we can, and we do. And herein lies both the beauty and the tragedy of regret. Let's look inside the mind. Because regret isn't just emotional, it's deeply neurological. In 2004, a team of neuroscientists led by Antoine Becker published a study that would change how we understand regret. They observed brain activity in participants making decisions that led to either satisfying or disappointing outcomes. What they found was that the orbitofrontal cortex, a region in the frontal lobe, lit up when participants imagined how things could have gone better. This region, responsible for decision-making and evaluating consequences, seemed to play a critical role in processing regret. Even more fascinating, people with damage to the orbitofrontal cortex, such as those with certain types of brain injuries, often report less regret. Not because they've made fewer mistakes, but because they can't simulate alternatives in the same way. In essence, regret is not just emotional. It's neurological. It's how the brain compares reality with imagination. And it's exhausting. When we dwell on the past, our brains are constantly toggling between memory and possibility, between what was and what could have been. This mental strain can lead to anxiety, depression, and even physical symptoms like insomnia or fatigue. Regret literally wears us down. But there's another side to this. In moderation, regret is one of the brain's most powerful learning tools. It tells us, that didn't work, try something else. It helps us refine our choices, sharpen our judgment, and even deepen our empathy. So the goal isn't to eliminate regret, is to learn how to listen to it without letting it paralyze us. But regret isn't only stored in memory. It's written into the stories we tell about ourselves and who we think we're supposed to be. Let's talk about Anna. Anna is 43. She's successful by most standards. A decent job, a stable relationship. But there's one thing that creeps into her thoughts on quiet Sunday afternoons: her dream of being a writer. In her early 20s, she wrote short stories in cafes, stayed up late editing pages, and even submitted to a few publishers. But rejection came, bills came, life came. She took a job in marketing, just for now. 20 years passed. Now, Anna wonders, what if I had just kept going? Anna's story is not unique, and neither is the pain she feels. Regret doesn't just live in isolated memories. It becomes a story, a narrative we replay, revise, and sometimes romanticize. Psychologists call this narrative identity, the internal story we construct about who we are, how we got here, and where we're going. And regret is like a scratch on that story. It disrupts the plot. It introduces a character, the past version of ourselves, who made the wrong choice. But here's the paradox. The more we fixate on that alternate story, the more we disconnect from the one we're actually living. The past becomes a haunting ghostwriter of our present. So what do? We rewrite. Not the events, but the meaning we give them. To truly understand where our regrets come from, we have to go further back, into childhood, into culture, into the environments that shaped how we see our choices. Regret doesn't begin in adulthood. Its roots reach further back, into childhood, where we first start to form a sense of choice, consequence, and self-reflection. Picture a child who breaks a toy by mistake. There's an initial burst of tears, not just from the loss, but from the dawning realization. I did that. It's one of the earliest cognitive signals of regret. But how the adults respond, with punishment, forgiveness, or indifference, becomes part of the child's emotional blueprint. If the child is shamed or constantly reminded of their mistakes, they may grow up internalizing regret as self-loathing. On the other hand, if the child is encouraged to learn from missteps, they can develop what psychologists call adaptive regret, the ability to reflect without spiraling. This early conditioning becomes the lens through which we process regret in adulthood. But that's just one part of the picture. Culture adds another layer. In Western societies, especially those focused on individualism, regret often takes on a deeply personal tone. I should have known better. I should have done more. It's my fault. The focus is inward. Regret becomes a solitary experience. But in more collectivist cultures, in parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, regret is often tied to the group. I let my family down. I brought shame to the community. The weight of regret is shared, but so is its resolution. Family and society play a larger role in healing. These cultural narratives don't just color our regrets. They shape which regrets we allow ourselves to acknowledge. In some cultures, expressing regret is a sign of maturity. In others, it's weakness. And for some, especially in patriarchal or high-achieving environments, regret is simply repressed. But no matter the upbringing, no matter the culture, the result is the same. Regret settles in like sediment at the bottom of a lake, quiet, heavy, waiting to be stirred. So why does regret sting so deeply? Why do some moments echo through us for years? Regret hurts not just because of what we lost, but because of what it says about us. When we regret, we're often confronting a version of ourselves that didn't live up to who we thought we were or wanted to be. This is what psychologists refer to as the identity gap, the emotional distance between our actual self and our ideal self. The wider the gap, the more intense the regret. Let's go back to Anna. She doesn't just miss the dream of writing. She mourns the version of herself who was courageous, creative, rebellious. The version that once believed she could shape stories and share them with the world. Her current self, responsible, practical, efficient, feels like a betrayal of that dream. That's the sting. Regret tells us we've violated something sacred. Not a rule, but a possibility. And it's not always about ambition. Could be how we treated someone we loved. A chance to apologize we didn't take. A boundary we failed to set. These moments carve a fault line between who we are and who we wish we were. And unless we tend to that rift, it can widen, becoming a source of chronic shame. But there's a powerful truth hidden in this gap. If you can imagine a better version of yourself, it means that version exists at least as a possibility. Regret is painful, yes, but it's also a mirror, showing us not just what we lost, but what we still long for. And that longing is a map. Not all regrets are created equal. Some come from what we did, others from what we never dared to do. Here's a curious thing. When researchers ask people about their biggest regrets, they often hear two kinds of answers. The first is regret of action. Things we did that we wish we hadn't. Saying something hurtful, cheating, quitting too soon. The second is regret of inaction. Things we didn't do. Not speaking up, not traveling, not starting that business, not saying I love you. And across multiple studies, from Daniel Kahneman to Thomas Gilovich, the pattern is clear. In the short term, we regret actions more. But over time, it's inactions that haunt us. Why? Because missed opportunities tend to live in our imagination. They remain unresolved. They don't have a clear ending. The door was never closed, we just never walked through it. And that lack of closure creates space for endless mental reruns. We wonder, what if I had just tried? The things we do wrong often come with consequences, sometimes painful but at least concrete. We can apologize, learn, move on. But the things we don't do, they stay soft and shapeless. A life unlived is harder to grieve than a mistake made. This is where the fear of regret can become a compass. When faced with a decision, ask yourself, which path in 20 years am I more likely to regret not taking? Sometimes, regret can whisper the way forward if we're willing to listen. Regret can spiral, but it can also be softened. Let's explore what psychology, specifically CBT, teaches us about working with it. Now that we understand what regret is, let's talk about how to work with it. One of the most powerful psychological tools for this is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. At its core, CBT teaches us that our thoughts are not facts. They are interpretations, and often those interpretations are distorted, especially when we're caught in regret. Let's say you think, I blew my chance. I'll never get another one. I always mess things up. CBT would invite you to pause and ask, is that thought true? Is it helpful? What's the evidence for and against it? What's a more balanced, compassionate alternative? Maybe it becomes, I made a mistake, but I've also learned, and I can create new opportunities going forward. This might sound simple, but practiced consistently, this reframing rewires how the brain responds to regret. It shifts us from self-attack to self-awareness. Another CBT technique is called behavioral activation. Instead of ruminating on the past, we act in the present. If you regret not prioritizing your health, start walking today. If you regret a broken relationship, write the letter. If you regret not pursuing your passion, take one small step, even if it's just 15 minutes. Regret thrives in stillness, but it can't hold on as tightly when we move. But what if the answer isn't in the mind at all, but in the moment? Let's talk about mindfulness. Sometimes, though, the past is simply too heavy, too complex, too far gone to rewrite. This is where mindfulness becomes essential. Mindfulness is the practice of paying attention, on purpose, to the present moment without judgment. And while it might sound like a buzzword, its roots are deep, spanning Buddhist philosophy, Stoic tradition, and modern psychology. What mindfulness teaches us is this: you are not your thoughts, and you are not your regrets. Regret may visit you, but it doesn't have to define you. In meditation, we learn to observe regret as a mental event, a cloud passing through the sky. We notice it, name it, and let it go. Breathing helps. Bringing your attention to the rise and fall of your breath grounds you in the now, where regret cannot survive. Because regret lives only in time, and the present moment is timeless. This isn't about denial. It's about presence. It's about saying, this is what happened, this is where I am, and this is what I choose now. Acceptance isn't resignation, it's power. And then there's the philosophical lens. Existentialism asks not how to avoid regret, but how to live in spite of it. There's a powerful branch of philosophy that wrestles directly with regret: existentialism. Thinkers like Soren Kierkegaard, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Viktor Frankl viewed regret not as something to escape, but as a window into freedom. Sartre famously said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself," meaning, we are not bound by our past. We are condemned to be free, to choose, to act, and to take responsibility for the lives we create. Regret, then, becomes the proof that we care, that we're not indifferent to our choices, that we believe in meaning, even when it hurts. Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, saw regret as part of the soul's search for purpose. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, he writes about how even the worst suffering can be given dignity through the attitude we adopt toward it. We may not be able to change what happened, but we can change how we respond. We can choose meaning over victimhood, growth over guilt. Existentialism doesn't promise comfort, but it does offer agency, and that agency is what regret ultimately points us toward. Eventually, the question shifts from why we regret to what we want to do now. So let's return to the question we began with. Why do we dwell on the past? Because part of us is still there. A piece of our psyche remains frozen in that moment, hoping that by replaying it enough, we can somehow undo it. But here's the truth. You can't change the past, but you can change your relationship with it. You can visit it with compassion instead of judgment. You can extract lessons instead of pain. You can honor the person you were, scared, hopeful, imperfect, and thank them for getting you here. You can grieve what was lost and still build what comes next. This is not forgetting. This is integration. But some regrets go deeper, the kind that involve others, the kind that require forgiveness, especially from ourselves. There's a kind of regret that cuts deeper than missed chances or unfulfilled dreams. It's the kind that says, I hurt someone, and I can't take it back. This kind of regret doesn't live in fantasy. It lives in reality, in someone else's pain, and often in our inability to make it right. Forgiveness in these moments can feel impossible, because the mind traps us in a loop. How could I have done that? What kind of person does that? Do I even deserve to be forgiven? But forgiveness, whether from others or ourselves, isn't about erasing the past. It's about releasing the grip it has on our identity. One of the most profound teachings on this comes from Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield. He writes, "Forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past." Let that sink in. Forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. Not because the past was okay, but because continuing to live in it is a prison. When you hold yourself hostage to past behavior, you deny yourself the chance to grow. You become forever defined by the worst version of yourself, instead of the version who learned, who changed, who tried to do better. That doesn't mean we stop taking responsibility. It means we recognize that responsibility and punishment are not the same. Sometimes the person we most need to forgive is the version of ourselves that didn't know better. That's not weakness. That's grace. What if pain could become purpose? What if we could transform our regret into something redemptive? Here's a story you might have heard. In 2003, a man named Azim Khamisa lost his son, Tariq, to a senseless act of gang violence. Tariq was a college student, delivering pizzas when he was shot and killed by a 14-year-old boy named Tony. Azim could have spent the rest of his life drowning in grief, bitterness, and regret, both for what happened and for the world that allowed it to happen. But instead, Azim did something unthinkable. He forgave Tony. He met with Tony's grandfather, and together they founded a foundation that now reaches thousands of at-risk youth, trying to stop violence before it begins. Azim turned his deepest pain into a mission. He didn't erase his grief. He channeled it. This is the power of post-traumatic growth, a psychological concept that describes how people, after facing profound loss or regret, can rebuild their lives around new values, new meaning, and new purpose. Not everyone has to start a foundation, but all of us have the capacity to turn regret into redemptive action. To say, "This hurt me, but I won't let it end with me." That's not just healing. That's transformation. Often, we judge ourselves with the wisdom we didn't have then. Let's talk about the trick of hindsight. One of the cruelest aspects of regret is how it distorts time. We often judge our past selves with the clarity and wisdom we've gained since the event, forgetting that at the time we didn't know what we know now. This is known as hindsight bias, the illusion that past outcomes were more predictable than they actually were. It's the voice in your head that says, "Of course it was a bad idea. How could I not have seen that?" But that voice forgets the confusion, the context, the complexity. It forgets that you made the best choice you could with the information, emotional state, and resources you had at the time. Imagine judging a child for not knowing calculus. That's what we do to our former selves every time we forget to offer empathy. The truth is, you didn't fail. You grew. You learned. You survived. And maybe, just maybe, the person you are now, the wisdom you hold, only exists because of what happened then. We are not static beings. We are living systems. And regret is often a signal of evolution. Some regrets can't be solved logically. They need something older, something symbolic, something sacred. Let's get practical. Sometimes no amount of thinking can release a regret. What we need is ritual, a symbolic act that lets the psyche know this has ended. Rituals have existed in every culture since the beginning of civilization. Burial rites, cleansing ceremonies, letters burned in fire, stones dropped into rivers. And while some may see them as primitive, neuroscience tells a different story. Ritual activates areas of the brain associated with emotional regulation and closure. So if there's a regret that still clings to your ribs, try creating your own ritual. Write a letter to the person you hurt or to your past self. Say everything, then bury it, burn it, release it in water, or take a photo, an object, a symbol of that regret, and offer it to the earth. Let it become compost for something new. These acts may seem small, but they mark a psychological threshold, a moment when the past stops being a loop and becomes a story with an ending. Because endings aren't just about closure. They're about opening something else. On the other side of regret is possibility, the quiet chance to begin again. What's on the other side of regret? Hope, not the naive kind, not blind optimism, but earned hope, the kind that arises after reckoning with the past and still choosing to move forward. Every moment you've spent regretting is a moment pointing toward what you value. If you regret not being present, it means presence matters to you. If you regret words you didn't say, it means you crave connection. If you regret a life not lived, it means you still believe in life. Regret is a compass, but only if you're willing to turn it into direction. The person you want to be, they're not behind you, They're not trapped in a decision from 10 years ago. They're still ahead, waiting. Not perfect, not polished, but possible. And that possibility is always worth walking toward. Of all the places regret hides, perhaps the most persistent is within our relationships. The friend we ghosted, the parent we didn't visit enough, the partner we couldn't love in the way they needed, the things we said in anger, or worse, the things we never said at all. Human connection is complex. We enter relationships without a map, carrying our wounds, our insecurities, our projections. We love imperfectly. We hurt others. Others hurt us. And often, when the dust settles, what remains isn't anger. It's regret. Sometimes it's a quiet ache. Sometimes it's a thunderclap of remorse. But always, it's rooted in this question: what if I had shown up differently? This kind of regret has a unique sting because it's tied to someone else's life, not just our own. We can't go back and undo the pain we caused. And the person we wish to make peace with may be unreachable, estranged, gone, or no longer the person they once were. But here's the truth. We don't need someone else's permission to begin healing. Psychologist Janice Abrams Spring calls this accepting forgiveness. It's not about asking someone to say, "I forgive you." It's about doing the inner work to forgive yourself for being human, for not knowing then what you know now, for loving clumsily but honestly. You can still honor the love you once gave, even if it ended in silence. You can write to that person, speak out loud what was never said, bring closure through intention, even if the relationship never gets a proper epilogue. Not all relationships are meant to be resurrected, but all regrets deserve to be witnessed and, when you're ready, released. Some regrets are small, forgettable, even laughable with time, but others feel like they split your life in two. Before the mistake, after the mistake. These are the decisions that feel irreversible, the ones that carry consequences far beyond ourselves. The business that failed, the affair, the betrayal, the lie that spun too far, the night that changed everything. And here's where shame enters the picture. Shame is regret's cruel cousin, whispering that what you did is not just wrong, but that you are wrong, that you are unworthy, unredeemable. But let's pause here. What if we reframed it? What if, instead of asking, "How could I have done that?" we asked, "What pain, fear, or ignorance led me there? What unmet need was I trying to soothe? What lesson was life painfully trying to teach me?" We are not just the sum of our actions. We are also the story of how we respond to them. Think of the people you admire most, the deeply wise, grounded, compassionate ones. Almost all of them have passed through some form of fire. Not despite their mistakes, but because of them. Mistakes don't have to define you, but they can refine you, and that's a definition worth living into. We live in an age where comparison is unavoidable. Scroll through any social media feed, and you'll see a curated museum of people's highlight reels, trips, successes, anniversaries, six-figure announcements, reunions, perfect bodies, perfect timing, perfect lives. And even if we know it's filtered, even if we know it's curated, it doesn't stop the quiet voice that says, "I should have done more. I should have figured it out by now. I'm falling behind." This is where modern regret thrives, not in what we actually missed, but in what we believe we've missed out on. Psychologists call this FOMO, fear of missing out. But at its core, it's regret dressed in new clothes. The regret of a life not chosen, of paths not taken, of timelines that don't match those around us. The antidote? Depth over breadth. Your life is not a checklist. It's a singular experience, shaped by your values, your wounds, your choices, and your time. Comparison distorts that. It makes you regret things that were never even meant for you. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not living someone else's life. Regret that stems from comparison isn't wisdom. It's noise. And it's okay to mute it. Let's fast forward to the very end. What do people regret most at the twilight of their lives? Bronnie Ware, an Australian palliative care nurse, spent years recording the dying reflections of her patients. In her book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, she shares a pattern. 1. I wish I had lived a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. 2. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. 3. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. 4. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. 5. I wish I had let myself be happier. None of them regretted the car they didn't buy, or the promotion they didn't get, or the number of followers they had online. They regretted not choosing joy, not living with more courage, not loving more freely. Let that sink in, because you're not on your deathbed. You're here, listening, breathing. You have time. Maybe not endless time, but enough time. Enough to speak the words. Enough to try the thing. Enough to become the person you keep dreaming about. Regret doesn't have to be the final chapter. It can be the preface to something new. Maybe the most powerful antidote to regret is this simple truth. You're still here, despite the heartbreaks, the missed chances, the wrong turns, the disappointments, the things you can't tell anyone. You are still here, and while the past may be written, the meaning of the past is not. That's the alchemy of being human. We can take what was and shape what is. Today can be the day you stop living backwards. The day you say, yes, that happened. And now I choose this. You may never forget your regrets, but you don't have to become them. Let regret soften you, not harden you. Let it make you kind. Let it make you brave. Let it remind you of what matters and of how deeply you care. And above all, let it remind you of what's still possible. Because that's the greatest secret of regret. It only hurts this much because you still believe in more. There's a moment, after the tears dry and the self-blame softens, when you begin to ask a different kind of question. Not why did I do that? Not what if I hadn't failed? But what do I need now? This moment, quiet, unglamorous, often unnoticed, marks the true turning point in the journey through regret. Because for the first time, you're not just looking back. You're turning towards something still unknown, still fragile, but very much alive. The possibility of becoming someone new. Let's talk about that. Not in the self-help Instagram inspo way, but in the real, slow, cellular way that reinvention actually happens, when you stop punishing your past self and start parenting your future one. Because that's what healing often is, reparenting yourself. Noticing the places where regret has left you underfed, emotionally, relationally, even spiritually, and choosing, day by day, to give yourself what you once lacked. Meet Marco. At 38, he had everything that was supposed to feel good. A stable job, a relationship, a decent apartment. But inside, there was a constant hum of disappointment. A dull ache that he had taken too many wrong turns. In his early 20s, Marco dreamed of being an art teacher. He painted obsessively, taught neighborhood kids. He believed in the power of creativity to heal, to connect, to transform. But after being told by family that art wasn't practical, he gave up the dream, got a business degree, took the safe route. 15 years later, regret showed up not as a scream, but as a sigh. Every time he opened his inbox, every time he saw a child sketching on the subway, every time he heard someone say, "Follow your passion," it was unbearable. Because regret doesn't just say you missed something. It says, you abandoned someone. Often, that someone is you. So what did Marco do? He didn't quit his job overnight. He didn't run off to Paris to paint watercolors. He did something more radical. He forgave his past self for not being brave enough, and then decided to become that brave person now. He started painting again. Not for the world, just for himself. He found a Saturday class at a local community center. Later, he started volunteering at an after-school program once a week, teaching kids who reminded him of the boy he used to be, the one who believed. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't make headlines. But little by little, the regret began to transform into purpose, into tenderness, into identity. Marco didn't become an art teacher by title, but he became one by spirit. And that's the point. You don't have to go back and relive your past to redeem it. You just have to listen to what it's still asking for. Is it freedom? Create space. Is it courage? Take a risk. Is it connection? Reach out. Is it forgiveness? Soften. Regret is often just a signal that something important got left behind, and that it's not too late to retrieve it. Because reinvention isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you needed when you made the decision you now regret. And maybe, just maybe, becoming the kind of person who can gently guide someone else through their own regrets. That's how cycles break. But let's also be honest. Reinvention is not easy, especially when you feel like you're starting over late, especially when everyone else seems to be further along. It's tempting to look at the mountain ahead and think, what's the point? I'm too old. It's too late. I already failed once. But those are not truths. They're protective thoughts. Shields we raise when hope feels too vulnerable. Because to try again after regret is to expose yourself to new regret, new disappointment, new failure. But here's the truth beneath that. You're already carrying regret, and you've survived it. So what if you used that resilience as evidence that you can try again? You don't have to climb the whole mountain. You just have to take one step toward something that feels more you. Maybe it's writing again, calling someone, applying, apologizing, asking, creating, letting go. The most powerful reinventions often begin not with fireworks, but with whispers. Not with clarity, but with curiosity. What if I still can? That question alone is a revolution. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi, the practice of repairing broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, kintsugi fills them with lacquer mixed with precious metals, honoring the history of the object. The flaw doesn't disappear. It becomes the most beautiful part. Imagine if we saw our regrets like that, not as wounds to hide, but as joins in the story. Proof that something broke and was lovingly, patiently, carefully put back together. Each gold seam is a moment we chose to return, to remember, to rebuild. What would your life look like if you filled your regret with gold? What if the version of you shaped by loss, by failure, by heartbreak, was the version most capable of loving well, leading wisely, living deeply? What if the very thing you regret is the thing that cracked you open enough to let the light in? There's a strange magic in that, and maybe even something sacred, because when you move through regret with compassion, when you reintegrate the part of you that faltered, you become something rare, someone who understands. And in a world so hungry for understanding, that's no small thing. You become the person who can sit with someone else in their grief, not to fix them, but to say, me too. And look, I'm still here. You become the person who doesn't judge others for failing, because you know how human that is. You become the person who can say, with gentle authority, you're allowed to begin again. And in doing so, you give others permission to begin too. That's how healing ripples outward, quietly, unseen, but profoundly. So if you're sitting in regret right now, if you feel stuck in something you can't undo, if you feel like you missed your chance, if you feel ashamed of who you were or what you did or what you didn't do, take this as an invitation to become who you needed, to become who you still are. To become who someone else will look at one day and say, "Because of you, I believed again." Not despite your regret, but because of what you did with it. That is the most human thing of all. And it's never too late. Not all regrets arrive with fireworks. Some sneak in through the back door of your mind, disguised as irritation, numbness, restlessness. They don't shout, they hum. A low-frequency ache beneath the noise of everyday life. These are the regrets you don't even recognize as regret, until one day, something cracks you open. It might be a song you hadn't heard in years, a scent that pulls you back to a place long buried, an encounter with someone from your past, a milestone birthday, a sudden silence, and then a memory rises, a version of you you'd forgotten, a fork in the road you never saw coming, a door that closed so quietly you didn't even hear the click. You sit with it, blinking, and you realize, I've been carrying this all along. These are the unconscious regrets, and they're some of the most powerful precisely because they live unexamined, unspoken, untended, not because you denied them, but because life moved too fast for you to notice. Let me tell you a story. There was a woman named Elise, a mother, a teacher, a good one. For most of her life, she believed she'd made peace with the fact that she never pursued music professionally. She told herself it was a childhood fantasy, a phase. Life had called her in another direction, and she answered. But at 62, while clearing out old boxes in her attic, Elise found a cassette tape labeled in her teenage handwriting, Elise, voice lessons, age 16. She almost didn't play it, but something in her hand trembled as she set the tape into the player and pressed play, and then her voice, raw, young, bright, uneven, full of promise. She listened and cried, not because she wished she'd become famous, not because she hated her life, but because she suddenly remembered a part of herself she hadn't mourned. That's what unconscious regret often is, unlived grief. It's the child we never had, the city we never moved to, the book we never finished, the dream we were too afraid or too tired to chase. Not because it was wrong to choose otherwise, but because we never gave ourselves permission to say goodbye. And here's the thing, not all regrets need fixing. Some just need honoring. You don't need to overhaul your life to make peace with the road not taken. You just need to acknowledge it, to let it speak. You might say, but it's too late to do that now. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's not too late to take one music class. Maybe it's not too late to write that poem. Maybe it's not too late to take that weekend trip alone, or paint that canvas, or learn that language, or tell that story. And even if it is too late to live the path, it's not too late to thank the version of you who once dreamed of it. That's how you move from unconscious regret to conscious integration. You don't fix the past. You fold it in. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is the hidden danger of unacknowledged regret. It doesn't disappear. It redirects. Unconscious regret becomes the bitterness we project onto others who did follow their dreams, the contempt we feel for younger people taking risks, the cynicism that creeps in when someone shares their excitement, the jealousy we pretend not to feel, the voice that says, "What's the point?" Every time we try to start something new, it's like a ghost running your life behind the scenes. Not because it's malicious, but because it's unspoken. That's why naming your regret is one of the most healing things you can do. Not to wallow, but to witness. Try this. Sit down in a quiet space. No distractions. Just a notebook or a blank screen. And ask, what parts of me did I abandon to survive? What paths did I turn away from? Not because they were wrong, but because I was afraid. What did I love once, before the world told me it wasn't worth loving? Write it down. All of it. and then ask, what can I still carry forward? Not to recover what's lost, but to let your past self know, I see you. I didn't forget you. I'm still listening. Even that, just that, is enough to bring the unconscious into the light. And light changes everything. There's also this, sometimes we inherit regrets that were never ours to begin with. You might be living under the weight of someone else's dreams, parents' unfulfilled potential, a sibling's expectations, a cultural script that told you what success should look like, a religion that said what was acceptable, a partner who projected their fears onto your desires. These become vicarious regrets, regrets passed down like heirlooms. We carry them confused, thinking the ache is ours, when really, it's a story we were born into. Maybe you regret not becoming a doctor, even though you never wanted to be one. Maybe you regret not marrying young, even though the thought always terrified you. Maybe you regret not having kids, even though you never truly imagined that life. In these cases, the healing comes not from fixing anything, but from giving yourself permission to live the life that actually belongs to you, to lay down the borrowed regret like a coat that never fit, and to step into your own skin, even if it's late, even if it's messy, especially if it's messy. There's something sacred about unearthing the regrets we never knew we carried. It's like discovering a hidden room in your house. Dusty, forgotten, but full of clues. Clues to your longing, your values, your unmet needs. And if you're brave enough to step into that room, to sit with what you find, something incredible happens. The regret doesn't vanish, but it alchemizes. It becomes tenderness, compassion, perspective. You start to understand people better, especially your younger self. You stop judging yourself so harshly. You realize that the ache wasn't punishment, it was guidance, trying all along to bring you home. So let this be an invitation not to regret your regrets, but to be curious about them. To open the box you sealed shut years ago. To listen to the hum beneath your busyness. To ask what still wants to be lived or at least acknowledged. Because unconscious regret doesn't mean you failed. It means you survived. And now you get to choose. Do I keep carrying it? Or do I let it teach me who I still have time to become? There's a point in every journey where you stop asking, what if things had gone differently? And start asking, what do I want to do now? This is the moment when regret meets redemption. And it doesn't always look dramatic. Often it's quiet, subtle. It might even go unnoticed by the people around you. But inside, it feels like this gentle tectonic shift. A turning inward, then forward. Not away from the past, but with it. That's the secret. Redemption doesn't erase regret. It includes it, honors it, and then builds something new on top of it. Take the story of Ethan. Ethan spent nearly 2 decades working in corporate finance. Good money, big office. But deep down, he always carried a private regret. That he never became a teacher. It wasn't just an idle dream. In college, he'd even pursued an education degree. But somewhere along the way, pressure from family, the promise of stability, he veered off the path. And over the years, the regret grew roots. He told himself it was too late, that he was too old, that changing paths would mean wasting everything he'd built. But regret has a strange way of persisting. Every time he mentored a junior employee, he felt a jolt of energy. Every time he helped someone understand a concept, he felt alive. Until one day he couldn't ignore it anymore. He didn't quit overnight. Instead, he found a local nonprofit that offered evening tutoring to underserved students. Once a week turned into twice, then 3 times. Eventually, he negotiated a part-time schedule at work and spent the rest of his week in classrooms. It wasn't flashy. He didn't get applause. But something happened. The ache began to fade. Because he wasn't just healing the regret, he was rewriting the story. This is what it means to live redemptively, to look at the broken pieces of your past and ask, how can I build something meaningful from this? It's not about fixing the past. It's about using the material life gave you, the joys and the sorrows, the wisdom and the wounds, to create something honest. Think of it like a mosaic. Individually, the shards don't make sense. They're jagged, chaotic, sometimes ugly. But arranged with care, they become art. Not despite their brokenness, but because of it. That's what your life can become, if you're willing to create with what's left. But here's the catch. Redemption asks something hard of us. It asks us to stop being the victim of our own story. That doesn't mean invalidating what happened. Some regrets are tied to real harm, deep trauma, or injustice. But even then, at some point, redemption invites us to say, this happened, it hurt, and I will not let it be the only defining chapter in my book. This is what philosopher Martha Nussbaum calls the narrative arc of healing. The belief that even after suffering, we can create continuity. We can write through the rupture, not pretend it didn't happen. This is not toxic positivity. It's not everything happens for a reason. It's deeper than that. It's the quiet, stubborn choice to keep writing when you could have closed the book. It's agency, and that agency is what turns regret into redemption. But redemption isn't always personal. Sometimes it's collective. Sometimes the regrets we carry are tied to larger systems, the roles we played in institutions, industries, ideologies we later came to question. The soldier who regrets their part in a war. The executive who regrets contributing to exploitation. The citizen who regrets staying silent during injustice. These are not just personal failings. They are reflections of how deeply we're entangled in society. And they can be some of the hardest regrets to face, because they require us to confront who we were within a system, and who we might now choose to become against it. But even here, maybe especially here, redemption is possible. Because owning your complicity and choosing to act differently is itself a radical act. You become part of the antidote. You become someone who not only regrets the past, but actively works to build a future that heals it. And that's not just redemption. That's legacy. There's a word in Japanese, ikigai. It means a reason for being. It's the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. But I think it can also mean something simpler, a reason to keep going even after regret. Maybe your ikigai is still waiting for you. Maybe it's been whispering through the cracks of your regrets. Maybe it's not a job or a title or a clear goal, but simply the choice to be awake to your life. To say, I don't have to start over. I just have to start again. And again, and again. Each time a little braver. Each time a little softer. Each time a little closer to the life that feels like you. Let me offer one final story. There's a scene in the movie Good Will Hunting, maybe you know it. Robin Williams plays a therapist, Sean, speaking to Will, a young genius with a traumatic past. Will tries to intellectualize everything, avoids vulnerability, deflects pain with sarcasm. Until one day, Sean tells him, "It's not your fault." Over and over, he says it, gently, firmly, until Will breaks. That scene is famous not just because of the acting, but because it reveals a truth many of us hide from. Some regrets are not ours to carry. Sometimes we blame ourselves for being hurt, for not being strong enough, for not leaving sooner, for not knowing better. But healing begins when we stop punishing ourselves for being human. When we realize that the only way forward is through tenderness. Not self-pity, but compassion. So let me say this to you wherever you are in your journey. You are not broken. You are becoming. And regret is not your enemy. It's your teacher. A brutal one, maybe, but honest. And if you're listening closely, it's not just saying you failed. It's saying you cared, you tried, you're still here, and that means there is still time to reach out, to begin again, to write the next chapter, to redeem the last, not perfectly, not painlessly, but authentically, and that is enough. That has always been enough. So here we are, at the end of this journey through memory and imagination, through grief and growth, through choices made and paths not taken, through the quiet ache that all of us, in one form or another, carry within. Regret, what began as a whisper, if only, grew louder, then deeper, then softer again, until it became something else entirely, a reminder that we are not machines, that we feel because we care, that we regret because we hope, that even our most painful missteps are evidence of our desire to get it right, to love better, to live fully, to be true. Regret is not weakness. It is memory asking to be felt. It is the past asking not to be erased but to be understood. And more than anything else, it is a call to wake up to what still matters, to the phone call you can still make, the story you can still write, the person you can still become, the silence you can still break, the forgiveness you can still offer, even if it's only to yourself. Because this moment, this one, is still yours. And that's the thing regret so often hides from us. We think we're out of time, but we're not. Not yet. You may never undo the past. You may never become the version of yourself who got it all right. But you can become the version of yourself who listens, who learns, who chooses again even now. You can become someone who carries their past gently, who doesn't flinch at their memories, but holds them like old photographs. Grainy, imperfect, sacred. You can say to yourself, yes, I hurt. Yes, I failed. Yes, I turned away when I should have leaned in. And still, I am here, not broken, becoming. There is a quiet kind of power in that. Not the power of certainty or success or perfect outcomes, but the power of presence, of being with yourself fully, kindly. Now, because when you choose presence, you choose life. Not the life that could have been, but the one that still is. And that is always enough. Always. So before you go, take a breath. Place your hand on your chest. Feel the echo of everything you've lived through. Every mistake. Every victory. Every moment you thought would break you but didn't. You are still here. And that is the beginning of everything.